Hi everyone, I'm excited to be able to read to you an exclusive new chapter from J.K. Rowling's new book, Harry Potter and the First Granger Government. So without further ado, here it is. Chapter 1. The Meeting. Hermione had had enough. Having finished all 6 courses, it was now time to face that which she feared the most. But this was no boggart, and no spell could prevent the disaster that was about to unfold in front of her. "We've got to do something about Gringotts," she said, with her head in her hands. "Easier said than done," replied the Under-Secretary for the Magiconomy, Reg Cattermole. "They don't like you." "If you're referring to the incident with the dragon, I was barely involved." "Try telling that to Griphook's widow," said Harry under his breath. "Oh, she's not at it again, is she?" Putting Griphook's widow to one side, Hermione knew that something had to be done about Gringotts. "Something has to be done," she said. She felt better now that she'd said it aloud. "But Gringotts the best bank," retorted Neville Longbottom, Under-Secretary for Agriculture. "Yes," shouted Hermione, "they're the only bank. Have you tried getting a mortgage with them? Even Harry couldn't get one for his cupboard. And don't get me started on wheelchair access." "Goblins, eh? Gobbling up our money," chuckled Ron. Hermione glowered at him. "What are you even doing here, Ron?" she said through gritted teeth. "But Fred said, it's been 20 years, Ron. Get a grip," snapped Hermione angrily. "A grip hook, you mean?" replied Ron sadly. Fred would have liked that one. She turned away from him. Something still needed to be done about Gringotts. "We could always," started the Under-Secretary for Magiconomy. "Oh, not this again," she shouted reproachfully. She knew exactly what he was going to say. The previous Under-Secretary had considered herself something of an expert on muggles. After coming across some adverts in an old copy of the Daily Mail, she had placed the Ministry of Magic's entire national debt on a credit card and sent the sword of Godric Gryffindor to cash for gold. Realising her mistake, she'd quickly come up with an equally ingenious solution. In the same newspaper, she had read something about a muggle politician's magic money tree, leading her to plant several of these trees in the grounds around the ministry. Hermione had been dealing with hyperinflation ever since. "Haven't any of you," she started wearily. She was going to say studied PPE, but she realised there was no point. If Hermione had learnt one thing since becoming Minister for Magic, it was that most wizards were morons. At one point, she had thought of Dumbledore as a genius. Long ago, however, she had realised the truth. The man had been as thick as cold polyjuice potion. While people like Arthur Weasley were happy to talk condescendingly about how the muggles could cope without magic, most witches and wizards were themselves unable to tie their shoelaces without using at least 6 spells. Upon entering Hogwarts, Hermione thought, the IQ of the average muggle-born must drop by at least 50%. Not that any of these buffoons would know what that meant. Even muggle-borns like herself hadn't done any sort of basic maths since primary school, and they were, as far as she could see, the only witches and wizards that had been to primary school. Since leaving Hogwarts, Hermione had only been able to count to 7, and that was only by listing Horcruxes. True, it was said that Dumbledore could count to 115, but that was only because he needed to remember his age. Sometimes Hermione couldn't help but think that Hermione had been on to something. What sort of school would encourage their pupils to fight dragons, or banning them from visiting the local village without a permission slip? Yes, like Gringotts, something had to be done about Hogwarts. But it could not be done today, Hermione thought. "Percy, any news from the Regents?" she asked, without interest. "Well, the Nationalists aren't happy. They're saying there aren't enough Welsh students at Hogwarts." It was then that Hermione swore. "What are they complaining about? One of the teachers is Scottish." "Retired," said Harry. "Dead, actually," added Ron. "You know, I always thought the Welsh did their own thing." "Well, we invite them," said Percy pompously. "They just don't come. Most don't reply. Some even send their letters back to us." "Couldn't we just do the old trick with hundreds of letters?" suggested Harry, hopefully. "Not any more," replied Hermione. "Not since bird flu." "Look at this one, for example," continued Percy, pulling a crumpled envelope from his briefcase. "They just sent us back a curse." "Anwyl Hogwarts," he said, his brows furrowed in confusion. "Ble mae'r Cymraeg? Cofion cynnes, Coradwch ap Tomos Gwilym Malfoy." Suddenly, there was silence. Neville looked positively scared. Hermione groaned inwardly. "Cucularum transulatum," she said. As it levitated into the air, the letter began to speak. "Dear Hogwarts," it said. "Where's the Welsh language people? Hoping you are well. I like coffee." "Ah," gasped the cabinet collectively. "That reminds me," said Harry. "Where's Malfoy?" "Testing his wand," replied Hermione. "In Durham." Everyone nodded in understanding. This made perfect sense. "Well, it's not like he's going to buy a wand there, is he?" chortled Ron. They all laughed. All except for Hermione, who had had enough of the Ministry's one shop per sector policy. One bank, one school, one newspaper, one wand shop. What was it that Muggle philosopher had called monopoly? The highest stage of capitalism. But this was not capitalism. This was a shambles. The economy was just one early retirement away from recession. Hermione had had enough. And to think, she could have been a dentist.